Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Welcome to this month's edition of Why You Should Play, and today I'm going to discuss why you should play Castles and Crusades from Troll Lord Games. So what I'll be doing today is taking a peek through the two core books that castle keepers, game masters in this case, would need to run Castles and Crusades. And I'm going to talk about what I really like about this role-playing game, as well as the siege engine system that it is built upon. All right, with that said, let's swing on over to the other camera, because the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the Player's Handbook. So one thing I love about this print run is that the Player's Handbook, the Castle Keeper's Guide, and Monsters and Treasure all have homage covers. So they are all homages to the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons covers. So here's the Player's Handbook. Here's the Castle Keeper's Guide, which we are not actually going to take a look at because this is not a core book. I'll talk about that in just a bit. And then we've got our Monsters and Treasure. So, of course, Monster Manual for AD&D, which the cover art on that is just awful. Really like this art. All right, so let's jump on into the Player's Handbook. First thing I want to mention is the name. Castles and Crusades actually comes from the Castle and Crusade Society, which was a gaming group that Gary Gygax was a member of prior to Dungeons and Dragons. So I thought that was kind of cool that the title of the game is a nod to the origins of role-playing games. Should point out, Gary Gygax worked for Troll Lord Games. In fact, he was working for them when he passed away. It was the last company that he was working with. And to my understanding, he was working on adventures for Castles and Crusades. Now, he is not listed as a designer for Castles and Crusades, but I have had quite a few people tell me that they look at Castles and Crusades as what second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons would have been if Gary Gygax was the designer. So this is a very old school themed fantasy role-playing game. This is not an OSR game, at least not in my opinion, mainly because mechanically it is not based on original D&D or AD&D. This is far closer to third edition Dungeons and Dragons than it is, say, AD&D. So it's not a retro clone or anything like that. How I like to describe Castles and Crusades is that it is an old school vibe with modern mechanics. So this is built on a D20 mechanic. So one aspect I love about this is that we've got a slew of character classes, as we would expect from most fantasy role-playing games. And we get a few pages devoted to each of the classes. So every level or two, the character gets something new, gets some new abilities. So I love that. It keeps players engaged as opposed to, oh, well, you know, I went up a level and that just gives me an additional +1 to hit, which you see with many fantasy role-playing games. So, as I mentioned, this is a bit closer to third edition D&D than it is like AD&D, but there are no feats. Now, you could optionally include feats if you want. In fact, one of the aspects of Castles and Crusades I really dig is how modular it is. You can plug things in. You can homebrew stuff. The Castle Keeper's Guide is all optional rules. It is, like I said, it's not a core book. It is all optional material to make the game crunchier if you want, to give you more like combat options, things like that. Really, really interesting. But I also dig the fact that you only need 2 books. So you need the Player's Handbook, you need Monsters and Treasure. And that's all a Castle Keeper needs to run Castles and Crusades. So let's talk about the siege engine mechanic. So it is a D20 mechanic. We still have our traditional attributes. We've got our strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, as well as our 3 to 18 range, which is going to give us a modifier, either negative for really low scores or positive for higher scores. So we have checks. So we have attribute checks, we have saving throws. They're effectively the same thing. An attribute check is pretty much something that the player is going to instigate. So say they want to try to climb a wall or something like that. So that would be a check against an attribute, whereas a save is like saving against a spell or a trap, something that's environmental or that's caused by an NPC. Regardless, it's still going to be resolved the same exact way. Now, one thing that's really cool is the fact that we've got primary and secondary attributes. And some castle keepers have a little bit of trouble wrapping their heads around this. And I've got a tip that has been shared with me by a few people to make your lives a little easier if you do find yourself kind of stumbling over this challenge base. But we have primary and secondary attributes. And a human character gets 3 primary attributes. They get to choose whatever they want, and they don't have to be the highest scores either. Interesting. And then we have secondary. Now, non-humans only get 2 primary because they get all the other goodies. They get all the other special abilities like dark vision and can't charm me or can't put me to sleep. You know, things like that. And of course, humans are usually the adaptable race in the vast majority of fantasy role-playing games. So we've got the primary and we've got secondary. So action resolution is a D20 roll. So you're going to start off with a challenge base. Now, the challenge base for a primary attribute, doesn't matter if it's a test, doesn't matter if it's a save, it is 12. For a secondary, it is 18. Now, the Castle Keeper will also add a challenge level. So they're going to add more to that number based on the difficulty of the save or what a player is looking to achieve. So it's very possible you could have challenge numbers well into the 30s for something that's going to be nearly impossible to pull off. But the players get modifiers. So they'll have various different modifiers from their attributes, maybe from their equipment or gear, and they get to add their level. So a level 10 character is automatically going to get plus 10 to their D20 roll along with the other modifiers. So something to keep in mind. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes Castle Keepers get tripped up a little bit with the 12 and the 18. So I've been told by people that it's far easier just to always have the challenge base 18. And then, of course, you add your challenge level. And then, if the player is rolling a primary attribute, they get to add 6 to the die roll. Plus their modifiers, you know, and their level, so on and so forth. Now, it might sound like, well, that's a lot of math. It's not a lot of math for the players because they're going to know what their modifiers are already totaled up, because there aren't like environmental modifiers that the players have to worry about. That all falls into the challenge level for the Castle Keeper. That's it. That's really the core mechanic of the game. And it applies to combat as well. So, like the fact that once you wrap your head around the core siege engine mechanic, you've got everything covered. Everything works from that same core mechanic. Pretty sweet. Love the illusionist character in Castles and Crusades as well. Very, very unique, very different than just about any other illusionist in a fantasy role-playing game that I've run across. Would be really, really cool to play as an illusionist. So that's one of the other things that the primary and secondary attributes allow you to do as well. And that is custom tailor your character more than just their class and their race. So as an example, maybe you want to be a fighter, but you want to be more of an investigative character, more like an inquisitor or something like that. Well, obviously, you would take a primary attribute in strength, and then you would take a primary attribute as intelligence, because you're going to have these various different checks, various different saves. So if you're trying to decipher a clue, then you would be making a check normally against intelligence. So all the rules of the game are located in here, not taking up a ton of space. In fact, up to this point, 197 pages is all player character facing, and the rest, which is maybe 50, about 53 pages, is devoted to the actual rules of the game, and the Castle Keeper gets information about various different checks based on the different attributes, your challenge level, determining different things, different saves. Goes into combat. Combat is not super crunchy. It is not super tactical. It's not just simply rolling D20, rolling damage. There are more options in the Castle Keeper's Guide, of course, if you do want a far more tactical combat system. But all in all, everything that you love about those old school fantasy role-playing games is included in Castles and Crusades with a far more modern approach. And we're going to take a look at Monsters and Treasure real quick. And I'm going to share something else that I really think is cool about Castles and Crusades. And that is, there's only one edition of Castles and Crusades. Now, there are multiple print runs of these books over the last near 20 years. And there have been some tweaks made. But the essence of the game, the core of the game has not changed at all. So it isn't as if, like many, many role-playing games out there that have been around as long, or even some not as long, every few years you've got a new edition that comes out that completely changes the core mechanics of the game so that you have to purchase new books. That is never the case with Castles and Crusades. The first edition that came out, even the ones that came out in digest-sized books in a box, which was kind of a throwback to original D&D, just as viable now as they were when they came out. Like I said, there are some tweaks that have been made over the years, but not to the point where it's like, oh, yeah, it's been 4 years. Okay, got to go buy all the other books now. Something else I love about Castles and Crusades is not only is there just a ton of adventures that are available through Troll Lord Games, which unfortunately I have not had an opportunity to look at any. I would love an opportunity to review some of those adventures and share some coverage of some of the adventures with you. I understand there's even like some box sets that are available, but you also have decades of Dungeons and Dragons adventures that you could easily port over to Castles and Crusades. And I would say Castles and Crusades is probably the easiest non-OSR, non-retro clone role-playing game for you to convert anything from original Dungeons and Dragons all the way up to about 3rd edition. I don't know about 3.5. 4th edition, not really. But think about it. That's not only do you have loads and loads of adventures from Troll Lord Games written for Castles and Crusades. But you also have decades of D&D you can draw upon as well, plus third-party products that were out there as well. All the Judges Guild stuff, it's amazing. It is awesome. And like I said, very, very easy to port over. So with the monsters, we've got all our monsters that we're used to seeing. Now, of course, there is a new print run that's coming soon. I don't know when it's coming out. And unfortunately, you won't have these homage covers any longer. I don't think. I think it's brand new artwork that you're going to have in this new print run. And it's going to be getting rid of anything related to the D&D SRD, which there isn't really much anyway. Lastly, should also point out that although there is a core setting for Castles and Crusades, in fact, there are multiple settings for Castles and Crusades and adventures for the different settings, it is not truly baked into the player's handbook and the monsters and treasure book. So you could easily utilize your own home campaign world or any other published fantasy campaign world very, very easily. So as you can see, just loads and loads of monsters in here. And then we wrap up with treasure and various different tables for all different kinds of treasure and magic items and how to stock dungeons and layers and things of that sort. So that is the Monsters and Treasure book. Let's swing back over to the other camera because I'm going to share some final thoughts about Castles and Crusades. Something else I should mention, both of the Chenaults, Stephen and Davis, I think it's Chenault. I think they're both veterans. I know one of them is a veteran. And they do a lot of stuff for veterans. So Troll Lord Games does a lot of things for veterans, which I think is also very, very cool. But getting back to their game, I like Castles and Crusades a ton. And I certainly recommend it for anyone who's looking for kind of an old school role-playing game, fantasy role-playing game, that has more modern mechanics. If you're far more comfortable with, rolling a d20, hey, we're looking for high, adding modifiers, looking to beat a difficulty number, challenge number, what have you, then you'll feel right at home with Castles and Crusades. I love all the options that are available. I love how the character classes are unique and that the characters actually gain something at least every 2 levels, sometimes every level, all depending on what level they happen to be. And love that. And also love the fact how modular Castles and Crusades is. If you want to add skills in, you can add skills. If you want to add feats, you can add feats. If you want to add more crunchy combat mechanics, you certainly can. And as you can see, the Castle Keeper's Guide is a pretty big volume, and it's all optional content. And there's loads of content for Castles and Crusades. You are certainly not going to be wanting for adventures or supplemental material by any stretch of the imagination with Castles and Crusades. I really dig it. I certainly recommend it. It is an excellent fantasy role-playing game. And I honestly think you should play Castles and Crusades. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ding that bell, because not only will it let you know when I upload videos such as this month's Why You Should Play, it'll also inform you when my live stream the Gaming Gang Dispatch airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Thank you so much for taking time out to watch the video, and until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.